Okay, so welcome everybody to the last session of the first day of WAPPP Annual Congress 2022. Good morning to our friends in the Americas, good afternoon to our friends in Europe and Africa, and good evening to our friends in Asia and Australia. On behalf of we want to thank the World Association of PPP units and PPP professionals for inviting us to host this panel on the role of private sector as a catalyzer of sustainable infrastructure. Throughout the day, we have heard several speakers talk about the role that PPPs will have in the deployment of efficient solutions to reach the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We have heard interesting discussions about financing innovative PPPs that include ESG taxonomies and of the importance to provide an impulse to resilient PPPs, among other topics. This session will be focused on analyzing the role that the private sector has in the development of developing sustainable infrastructure to PPPs. And we all know about the benefits of PPPs. It's been taught in literature. Some of you have experienced it firsthand, but I just want to make a little stop on the road and remind all of us what the advantages of the most important advantages of PPPs are. As you know, one of the first and most important ones is that it provides access to financial resources. It takes advantage of the technical expertise and knowledge of the private sector and the public sector as well. It improves implementation and enforcement capacity, and of course, brings legitimacy to projects. So all these special characteristics of PPPs are undoubtedly vital for the development of sustainable projects. And that's why the UN, when the UN developed the Sustainable Development Goals, they recognize the importance of PPPs as one of the most efficient ways to deploy and to build and to operate sustainable infrastructure. And indeed, the challenge we have is enormous when it comes to developing and reaching the SDGs of the UN. Just in the case of Latin America and the Caribbean, in order for us to reach these goals, we're going to have to invest around $2.2 trillion in the next decade, just to advance the achievement of infrastructure-related SDGs. In addition, it is estimated that in terms of making the infrastructure more resilient, we're going to have to make additional investments of between 3 and 5% the current investments. So as government makes strides to recover economies after COVID, the private sector becomes a strategic ally. PPPs are instrumental for mobilizing private investment and innovation for sustainable infrastructure development and much needed infrastructure employment generation. As infrastructure assets will create 35,000 jobs for every $1 billion spent. This investment also could have an important effect on reducing poverty and inequality, since it has the potential to increase the income of the average citizen in a range of 2.8 to 5.4%. So in this session, we're going to talk about, as I discussed before, the role of the private sector. I'm going to take Latin America as an example. Why Latin America? Well, because in Latin America, we're at a point right now where after COVID, this was one of the worst regions, one of the regions that were worst hit by COVID globally. And after COVID, and with all the changes that we're seeing politically in the region, along with financial strides that some countries are going through, and the inequality that we see, it is a region that can provide a lot of examples for the rest of the developing world. And so we wanted to have this opportunity for my investors to talk to you about it, to show you what we're doing. And we're doing it with a very, very interesting panel. And these are all people that are used to working with PPPs in several and distinct fashions from different angles, from the financial, legal, technical. And so we thought it would be good to bring them and talk about their hands-on experience in developing PPPs and in developing, especially PPPs that are focused on SDGs. I'm going to make a quick presentation of them. And first we have Jessica Springsteen, who is a partner at Clifford. And Jessica, thank you for being with us. Also joining us is Johanna Gomez, which is a lead investment officer at IB Invest based out of Panama. Camilo Gonzalez, a partner at Ernst & Young Colombia, and Hector Mendez, who's the general counsel for the Rumichaca-Pasto Highway Concession, which is owned by Sacyr Group. Thanks to all of you for the opportunity to be here with us today. And so I want to start off this panel, and as I'm being told that our attendance is growing by the minute, so it's a good moment to start a panel with a general question to all our panelists. And the question is, as you know, part of the people that are attending this meeting are officials from PPP units from around the world, including Latin America, but also from around the world. So can you share with them your opinion about the efficiency or lack thereof of PPPs to develop sustainable infrastructure? And Jessica, I want to start off with you.
Great, thank you so much, Ricardo, and thank you so much for having me on your panel this morning. And hello to my fellow panelists. So I'm sure it's been said throughout the day, but sustainable and resilient infrastructure development is obviously a key pillar for achieving and maintaining the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. And we all know that public resources alone are just insufficient to meet the regions, Latin America's and probably the rest of the developing world's, the significant infrastructure development needs. So, what do? We have to mobilize both public and private capital at scale for sustainable infrastructure. And I think, when we think about sort of sustainable infrastructure, we just need to figure out what is our understanding of what that means? What are the sustainable assets, as well as, the guidance on, what to do during the planning phase, the design phase, procurement, execution, and operation. There's been major efforts and, just moving, getting the PPP process ahead. But there has been a lack of alignment, I think, in terms of what is, and also an understanding of what is sustainable infrastructure. There hasn't been one common definition, that's been agreed across industries, and I think, or even the actors within the industries, which I think is obviously something that goes to the inefficiencies of PPPs. I think a lot of times people, in players and actors assume that sustainable infrastructure is the nature of the project, and that is sufficient to determine whether it's sustainable. So if you're doing a solar power plant or a water treatment plant, many actors still think that those are automatically considered to be sustainable, which we know is not the case, because you need to categorize them. So we need to have one recognized sustainable infrastructure definition, which I think is key. And we have all sorts of institutions, organizations, financial advisors, and financial players who've come up with different taxonomies of instruments and vehicles. I think one of the key things to do in terms of being more efficient is trying to tie, the projects with the financial resources. And obviously, institutional investors are right now essential to bridging the sustainable infrastructure gap. In particular, pension funds and other type of key capital market players that are capable of influencing investments and decisions throughout these markets. So what I would say is, in order to be more efficient, we need to develop further instruments dedicated to infrastructure, which could be defined by defining, infrastructure as a specific asset class, develop maybe a national or regional taxonomy, which I'm sure has been discussed for sustainable investments, adapt institutional investor regulations to stimulate that investment, and embed the criteria or sustainability incentives to shift the infrastructure market, and then also to adapt PPP regulation to standardize reporting and disclosure on sustainability criteria. So I will pass it on to.
Thanks, Jessica. Johanna. Yeah, that's right. Johanna, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Ricardo and the organizers for inviting me to this panel. It's a pleasure to be with my colleagues. So regarding your question, and you have provided some interesting numbers, I would like also to mention that in accordance with estimations from the IDB, made in 2019 in order to meet the Sustainable Development Goals for 2030 in Latin America and the Caribbean, it's necessary to invest at least $2,200 billion in water and sanitation, energy, transportation, and telecommunications infrastructure. This is around 3% of the regional GDP. Do you believe that will be possible by the public sector alone? I think that the answer is not. First, I believe we need to focus on what sustainability means, because I think that it's very important in this panel. And in my opinion, sustainability implies three main dimensions: environmental, social, and economic. Having in mind those dimensions, a PPP where the public and private sector interact both together, looking for their specific goals, can achieve great objectives. PPPs become more efficient in developing countries such as Latin America, that is our main focus region at IDB Invest. The public sector in some countries are facing the lack of technical capabilities to execute challenging projects, in addition to the financial constraints for executing pure public projects. Now, executing sustainable projects involve a tremendous effort in terms of cost, management, and planning that must be a joint ask for the private and the public sector. It is necessary the country and the public sector to make an effort in order to first develop a coherent PPP policy, promote institutional and legal framework that is necessary to support the participation of the private sector. To conclude, a PPP works aligning interests between the public and the private. In an efficient PPP, the private sector complement the deficiencies the public sector alone could face executing projects.
Thank you very much, Johanna. And now we want to hear from Camilo. Camilo, please.
Thank you, Ricardo. Hi to everybody, and I apologize for my camera. I swear it's not a lighting issue. I don't know what is going on, and I know that I'm very dark. But going into the subject, I couldn't agree more with Johanna and Jessica. We gotta get started with a definition, but this is not just to infrastructure. This is worldwide, and this is affecting corporates, capital markets, regulators. Everybody's is trying to get their head around ESG as a whole, and try to make definitions as to what that means, and how we're going to measure it, and how are we going to recognize it, and what are the changes that we want to see. So we're just getting started. So infrastructure sector is just, is part of that. I do think that, for example, in Colombia, we've taken steps already towards that, given that we had so many issues with infrastructure projects in every sector, energy, transportation, everything, with communities, with local communities. The new PPP program in Colombia, which is called the 5G, the fifth generation of PPPs, already includes in the contracts a percentage of all of the capex for the project that has to be spent on communities. Is very specific. It's already again, it's a clause in the contract. So it's a nice step forward. I do think that we got to get much farther than that. We, in terms of making the project sustainable, and in terms of actually making sustainable projects, not only we're going to have to make decisions as to what kind of projects do we want to push forward among all the pipeline that the different government have. And this is because we might just continue to do, for example, additional roads. I wonder if that is the way, that is the best mechanism to try to get more cargo out of the country, for example. Or if we should go for rail, which of course has tremendous environmental effects. Or as we're doing in Colombia, actually with the IDB Invest, or using the rivers. When you think about it, when you go down the river, you are actually going down the river, basically just with very little push to get the cargo out of the country. And when you think about those kind of boats and the trucks that would replace, it's amazing. The environmental impact is huge. So I do think there are two components. One of them is the projects themselves. And then the other one is within a project, how can you make it more sustainable? But again, I think that we got to get started, as everybody else is, getting the definitions right and getting the measurements right. We got to know what is it that we're going to measure and create the indicators so that we incentivize everybody to move forward.
Thank you, Camilo. And that was a very interesting insight. And even though your comments were really bright, and thank you very much for that. And I want to give the floor to Hector to talk about his opinion on this question. Go ahead, Hector.
Thanks, Ricardo. First of all, I would like to thank IDP Invest for the invitation to this session. The first thing that we did when we received this invitation was discuss with our team here in Sacyr and the Concession area in Chacapasto in Colombia about if these PPP projects develop efficiencies in order to develop sustainable infrastructure. In our opinion, the P3 model can create efficiencies for the development of sustainable infrastructure. And actually, I'm a professor at the Universidad de los Andes, and I teach multiple courses on infrastructure, financing, laws, and regulation. And we have concluded that governmental agencies are generally required to maintain minimum standards in all their concession contracts. As Camilo Gonzalez mentioned before, this provision of each contract typically imposes obligation on counterparties to develop sustainable infrastructure and give the uniformity, ensure that all projects governed by this contract are held to these minimum standards. The concession agreement does not only provide a framework for developing, constructing, operating infrastructure projects. It has something more important. It also could demand compliance with environmental and social requirements that protect the environment and improve conditions for people generally. This also helps generate jobs and has a significant impact on GDP. Actually, in our project, we hire more than 5,000 people, and we definitely increase the conditions, the economical conditions, in order to help people to leave the poverty. For example, in fourth generation and fifth generation concession contracts in Colombia, so it requires projects to comply with the Equator principles. This not only contributes to the bankability of this project, which is very important from a financing perspective. All the banks are requiring that you have to develop, that you have to comply with these principles and with the IC principle, and etc. But it also contributes to sustainable development. Equator principles require companies at the end to assess their environmental and social risks and consider alternatives options to decrease such risks. When you minimize environmental and social risks, you further sustainable development. In that regard, such concession contracts, at least in Colombia, is the invitation for the world, promote sustainable economic goals, full and productive employment, and decent work for all, reduce inequality, and most important, allows end poverty in all its forms. At the end, sustainable management focus on integrating local communities, having a positive impact on the environment. This is our conclusion, Ricardo and your panel, about this question that is really, really interesting one.
Ricardo, if I may add something, which I think is a good background for the whole panel that we're going to have. I really think that and we all know infrastructure is for development. What we're doing, developing highways, developing ports, developing airports, developing healthcare. This is all development. This is infrastructure is caring for the people and developing the assets, the infrastructure that they need so that they can have better lives. That's what it's all about. So I really don't think we got to think about infrastructure and then on the other hand, environmental benefits. I think infrastructure does have impacts on the environment, of course, and I think that the world and everybody, regulators and lenders, capital markets, everybody is really considering that. We're going to get into that later on, but we really got to think that, you know, at the end, infrastructure is in order to improve the lives of people. So yeah, we got to minimize the potential impacts on the environment, but at the end, the benefits from developing infrastructure, I think is very clear for all of us that are higher than the potential impacts for environment. And then, of course, every project has, at least in the projects that I have participated in Latin America, they have a great focus on the environment and what are the implications. And we all do the value for money for these kinds of projects for the governments, and they have to decide if to go ahead with the project or not. And the decision is based on that. What are the benefits that we get, and what are the costs that we're incurring? So I think that is a good framework for this discussion.
It is true, Camilo. And when we talk about sustainable infrastructure, it is important to note that we're not talking about environmental aspects only. So there are other aspects that we have to think about when we think about sustainable infrastructure, right? So we need to talk about social aspects. We need to talk about governance. And but it is true that it's a general. For the laymen, if I may, for the lay people, sorry. The term when one talks sustainability, they immediately default to the environment, and that leads me to the next question for Jessica. So you know, we're talking about you know, fulfilling social, environmental, and governance aspects of projects. But along with these aspects, the developers need to take into account others, right? So they need to think about, for example, the Basel III framework, and let alone that, then they also need to think about the local regulatory framework and the local, characteristics of each country where they're developing projects. So these are a lot of variables, right, to think about. And I wanna ask you, Jessica, because sometimes this might seem overwhelming to developers and to financiers, but taking all this into account, how do you see the private sector tackling the sustainability issue, and why has it become so important in recent years?
So thank you so much. I think it's been important just because of where we are in terms of the energy transition. I think post-pandemic realities have brought to light things that have always been present, but, you know, gender disproportionate inequalities and things of that nature. And so I think institutional investors are being driven by their corporate boards, but I think also just the younger generation and workforce that very much values, both E, S, and G. As you rightly say, it's not just environment, but, you know, social and governance. And so, you know, so taking a look at what these investors really, you know, what are the reasons that they are pursuing? I think, you know, the first thing is enhancing returns. And I think sustainable investing in the ESG components is having a positive effect on their returns. And I think people are still analyzing or exploring the relationship between ESG performance and corporate financial performance. So from what we can see, I think that, you know, sustainable investing is positive for the bottom line. So the likelihood that sustainable investing produces, you know, market rate returns is something that I think is a motivator. I think one of the other things is strengthening risk management. Institutional investors, commercial banks have increasingly observed the risks related to ESG issues that they can have on companies' market value or reputation. We've all worked on projects where, you know, not taking into account the social aspect has delayed or derailed the project completion. So it went from being sort of an ESG issue to a credit issue. And I think having that merged together over the last decade or 15 years has been an interesting evolution to see. Companies have seen their revenues and profits decline because of, you know, pollution spills or waste or weather-related supply chain disruptions, as we've seen in the pandemic. and other ESG-related incidents have come to light. So ESG issues can have a detrimental or harmful effect on companies and institutions, and it's a domino effect. So I think that's why one of the reasons it's become top of the mind. And also, I think, like I mentioned at the beginning, aligning strategies with the priorities of the beneficiaries and stakeholders. Beneficiaries and stakeholders are pushing investors to develop sustainable investment strategies. This has been something that, it's part of the global sustainable agenda, and investing strategies have appealed more generations. I think the numbers are 2/3 of high net worth millennials are very much focused on investing and doing business with institutions that have ESG mindset and goals. So I think that has been a key driver. So these are some of the things that I think we need to keep in mind, and I think how those investors integrate sustainability within their process is going to be the key to their success, because historically I think ESG or sustainability was done in parallel, but rather than sort of looking at it, in integrating it in their credit process or whatever it may be, for it to be, sort of analyzed in a holistic way and not just sort of as an add-on. So just from the investing side, looking at your mandate, having your strategy, and then how do you report it? How do you measure it? Think about the tools and processes. So I think that is really the key to trying to bridge all of these different pieces when you're looking at ESG and why are you going to invest in a sustainable infrastructure investment once we know what that means globally.
Very, very great insights, Jessica. And I think that leads us on to the next question for Johanna. And Johanna, Jessica was saying what the advantages are of abiding to or pursuing ESG characteristics in projects. What's the role of MDBs here? Because we know we have vast experience not only at IDB Invest, but also in other multilaterals, Latin American multilaterals, and so it'll be very, very interesting to know your intake about what are the financial enhancements that MDBs can provide, to push the ESG agenda, and if you can share with us some examples of what you've seen and what you've done in this regard in the region, that'll be great.
Sorry, I was having problems with the mic. Thank you, Ricardo. And basically, I believe that as Jessica has mentioned, one of the main things that we can do as multilaterals is like to equalize efforts in order to try to design and to build infrastructure that is sustainable. And in addition to the question that you are raising, basically, as you have mentioned, our main objective as Multilateral Development Bank is to close the gaps that exist in certain markets and that are restricting the execution of infrastructure projects in a sustainable and integral way. I'm going to mention some enhancements that, in my opinion, make the difference in the work as multilateral institutions do. I'm going to mention some financial and non-financial enhancements that multilaterals can provide to the projects. The first of one is providing longer tenors than the market can offer. This would let bigger projects to be developed and the repayment to be aligned with the real life of the assets. That will imply also a more efficient financial charge in cases where the total or part of the project is remunerated by the public sector, therefore by the people, meaning savings to the public finances. The second one is providing total or partial credit guarantees. This definitely will make possible to attract capital that otherwise will not be able to participate on infrastructure projects in some regions. Also, increasing the credit profile of the transactions, the cost of such capital will decrease, then the cost of the projects will be more efficient. A third one is providing sustainable linked resources. This is something that we do very well, and this means to bring to the table concessional funds available for transactions attached to specific achievements of environmental or social goals. This incentivizes the focus of the project in some objectives from a perspective different than only the financial one. And basically that will let the sponsors and the projects to be focused on other things and not thinking only on the return, because those extra investment are going to be financed with lower cost capital. Another thing that it's very important that we have been done in the last year is providing assistance in capital market solutions in order to mobilize resources that are not available for our regions. In that sense, for example, IDB Invest has been leader supporting the issuances of thematic bonds in the region. Currently, IDB Invest has supported almost 30 thematic bonds across the different sectors that covers, between green bonds, sustainable, social bonds, as the bond in Rumichaca, Pasto, that our colleague Hector knows very well, and sustainable linked bonds. And last but not least, and probably for me the most important one, a development financial institution brings to the table the companion and guide in the implementation of the practices in environmental, social, and corporate governance into the transactions. Currently, social is crucial for a project to be sustainable. And I agree with all my colleagues in this session that we thought before that environmental was the only thing in order for a project to be sustainable. Currently, this is not possible. It's not possible to have a project without considering the social part in order to complement the environmental part.
Thanks, Johanna. You're right. I mean, one of the roles of the MDBs are precisely to close the gaps, as you mentioned, for not only innovative projects to push forward, but also innovative ways of doing like the usual infrastructure of building highways, building ports, etc. And however, Camilo, and I want to turn over to you, and following this trend that we've been talking about, we've been listening about the benefits that we had, and Jessica told us the benefits about the ESG and adopting ESG practices, and Johanna told us about how this could be pushed or backed up by MDBs. But we constantly hear less and less, but we hear that some developers are reticent to investing and to implementing sustainability aspects if they are not specifically asked for, and even when it's desirable, because that increases their capex and that will make them less competitive for whenever they participate in tender processes. For taking that into account, what is your opinion about how to achieve a balance between bankability and sustainability in the PPP market, Camilo?
Thank you, Ricardo. I actually think that those two concepts go hand in hand, and again, going back to what we've seen in the past 10 years in Colombia, every project that we have developed has considered ESG, has considered social issues, environmental. It's a must. When you do the risk assignment, when you do the analysis of the project, when you get when you do the value for money, you're always considering that, and you're always considering those benefits and those costs. And when you're structuring the project, to say that be more conscious on make it sustainable, that's going to increase the capex and therefore it's not going to be attractive. I don't think so. When you structure a project, at the end you want to make sure that the return for the investors and of course the cash flow for repaying the debt is there. So it doesn't matter what the capex is. The project will always have to recognize a certain return for the project, according to market rates. It doesn't matter if the project is little or huge. The amount of capex is going to have to be returned to the investors and to the lenders at a certain rate, at market rate. So I don't, if there is an increase in capex, let's assume that there is an increase in capex because of sustainability issues or implementations that have to be done throughout the project. Well, guess what? That's from the beginning. That's going to have to be included in the return for the investor. So I don't think we have a division here. I think they go hand in hand. And in fact, what we're seeing now in the market, not only in Colombia but in many projects worldwide, given that there is pressure from corporates and from investors and from funds to put more focus on sustainability. Clearly, I do think that we're going to be different. We're going to be seeing differential rates in terms of return and in terms of debt for those projects that can really demonstrate that they're making an effort to be sustainable. I think that's the market that we're going to see in the next couple of years. There's going to be clearly a market that is going to acknowledge those benefits that are being generated, and one, they're actually going to be able to participate in those projects, and second, with better rates. I actually think that if you have difficulties thinking, a year from now, 2 years from now, if you have difficulties in demonstrating that the project is sustainable or that it has very positive effects in all of ESG, it's going to be difficult to get financing, and it's probably going to be more costly.
Thanks, Camilo, and you're totally right, and I think that's where we're heading to, and where the world is heading to, and also in Latin America we're going that way, and we're convincing the market is getting more and more convinced about implementing this ESG and sustainability characteristics, and we've heard about from the legal point of view, we've heard the opinion from our panelists, but it will be great to know about the developers and what's the take on the developers on this. And Grupo Sacyr, as you know, is one of the biggest developers globally of infrastructure. And Hector, who surpasses, plays a strategic role in one of the biggest concessions this group has in Latin America. And so, Hector, we want to know why do you think it's becoming more and more important for developers to include sustainability measures during the complete PPP life cycle? So not only at the beginning, but also in the operation and maintenance phase, and also the end of a concession. What will be your opinion on that?
Ricardo, we actually could spend hours talking about this topic. For us, it's very important. And this topic could be analyzed from two perspectives, from the practical one and from the ethical perspective. Let's be clear. From an ethical perspective, all of you know that it's a critical time in our history that calls for action to ensure that humanity survives long term. Climate change has generated drastic changes in the environment that affect our quality of life. For example, here in Colombia, we have suffering patterns like El Niño, La Niña, that may result in droughts and increase in rainfall that generate flooding. At the end, infrastructure project developers are among the best positioned to help protect the greater good and our future. By utilizing sustainability measures during the development of infrastructure projects, you mitigate the long-term risks associated with the climate change. From a practical perspective, infrastructure project developers are ensuring that sustainability measures are incorporated in their business strategy. You are protecting the long-term viability of your business. Without the environment, there are no infrastructure projects to develop. Without infrastructure projects, there are less jobs for people and less access to resources. Sustainability and infrastructure go hand in hand, including sustainability measures during the development of infrastructure projects, among other things, for cost savings and external benefits, like reducing the amount of energy consumption. Using Sacyr as an example, Sacyr recently refinanced 2 of its 4G projects here in Colombia. Both concessionaires for those projects were able to issue social bonds, giving Sacyr's commitment to helping rural farmers reach larger markets. We stimulate the local economy by having more than 5,000 people for each project, and we spend more than 400 million procurement of local goods and services. This, at the end, helps to the sustainability. Sacyr has a plan, the strategic plan 21-25, that is focused on sustainability and P3 contracts. It positions Sacyr as a market leader with sustainable and innovative value proposition. At the end, the company is committed to fighting climate change and aims to be carbon neutral by 2050. Sacyr plans, among other things, first, increase its investment in environment protection by 50%, double its investment in innovation by 2025, and third, and not less important, double the number of women directors in the company. So for us, Sacyr is an example of an infrastructure project developer that recognizes the importance of including sustainability measures during the whole life cycle of a P3 project. This is our opinion, Ricardo, regarding this question.
Thank you very much, Hector, and very interesting to learn about what developers are thinking and what are they doing and how they are overtaking this big challenge. So the next question was for Jessica, but I think she's having some trouble with the connection. So let's wait for her for a bit, and while we do that, I want to jump directly to Johanna. And so I just want to tell you and to all the panelists, this panel was it's just been allotted for 1 hour, but we're getting a lot of questions in the chat. So maybe if we can speed up the second round of questions, that would be good. So we can get in a couple maybe of questions from the audience. That'd be great. And so Johanna, so most of our world is going through a series of political changes which add on to the ESG, COVID, and inequality aspects. So taking this into account, how do BFIs have to evolve to continue promoting the mobilization of private capital into sustainable PPPs?
Yeah, Ricardo, indeed, the world has experienced drastic changes in the last years, and that have led our region to a challenging environment. In that sense, the best way the DFIs must evolve is being able to rapidly be adapted to those changes. That's the most important thing. In general, a DFI must be able to understand the differences between the different countries, must be able to remain close to each one of them, and must be able to react and provide tailor-made solutions adapted to each environment. That's the main thing for me. I believe that it's necessary to be close, to understand, and to speak the same language as our countries need it. Also, in some countries, in that sense, we need to clearly define which one is the best solution for each country. For example, in some countries, the DFIs should probably offer a pure financial solution to cover only financial needs. But in other countries, the solution probably should be focused on the guidance in the design of a program or a project from the very beginning until the execution, mainly in the less developed ones. Also, Ricardo, you have mentioned this at the beginning of the presentation. Infrastructure must be contemplated integral, not only the traditional infrastructure that has been typically structured by PPP schemes, for example, roads or transportation or energy projects. COVID-19 showed us how delayed is our region in terms of social infrastructure. I believe that that's a huge challenge. Education and social projects have been typically executed as pure public projects, and that's why the lack of private investment has led us to be in the way that we are right now. That is why I believe that now it's time to start focusing on social infrastructure, and probably that's a main role for us as multilateral institutions, and we need to incentivize the development of these type of structures through structures such as PPPs. In that sense, a DFI must provide integral and tailor-made solutions to those projects that can go from technical assistance, passing for local currency resources, because at the end, this type of infrastructure is typically financed and has typically revenues that are in local currency, and also capital market solutions in some cases.
Thanks, Johanna. Very, very interesting on how we're already evolving. Also, the MDBs are evolving. So that's great to know what's being done at IDB Invest. And Jessica, welcome back, by the way. Welcome
Sorry,
back.
I got-
Well, we missed you there for a couple of seconds, but we're back with you. And it will be great to know about your opinion. You know, as I told you at the beginning, there's a lot of PPP unit officers watching us, and you know, not only us but the whole event. And it will be great to you know give them your 2 cents about you know how to embed, how to include aspects of sustainability of in tender processes or in contracts, in PPP contracts. Sometimes PPP units and governments in general are reticent, or they don't know how much they should push in this regard when they are building PPP contracts, because they think that might affect the bankability of projects. And you have a lot of experience with this, and in one of the biggest firms in the world that leads with a deal story with infrastructure project development. So what would be your recommendation to them about this issue?
No, I think it's a critical issue and something that I think should be looked at country to country in Latin America, because as Johanna said, each country has different needs. But I think in general, you know, PPP contracts should embed all of the environmental and social safeguards, you know, their goals and designs and specifications, you know, along with the tender evaluation and your supplier selection and monitoring and contracting functions, just because, you know, that's the way that the financial world is looking at it. They want to see it across all of the environmental and social and governance, you know, aspects of what sustainability is, not just, you know, for example, for environment, historically, you know, you would have an environmental impact assessment and, you know, as part of the licensing and the contracting or the construction permits, and that was it. And now what I think the market really wants to see is sort of an integration of the sustainability across the life cycle of the PPP, and not just, you know, at the beginning or in the middle, or so I think that that's something that they need to keep in mind. So I think the sustainability considerations for PPP units should focus on making sure that the sustainability considerations are part of all 3 of the phases of the PPP phase, which is the design phase, the development phase, and the operational phase. And really, you know, sort of asking questions like, you know, have we engaged the private sector? You know, have we talked to the MDBs? Have we talked to the financial institutions or the institutional investors to see, you know, what their views are in the design and implementation? Does the actual project or the program that we're developing, you know, implement, you know, some of the key SDG, you know, one of, you know, 7, you know, there's 17, but you can't have them all, but, you know, whatever the project is it implementing the goal clearly enough? Does it, you know, has the program and has the PPP unit engaged with, you know, all sectors, you know, civil society, you know, people who are impacted on the ground, not just, you know, at the government levels? And I think, I mean, as we all know, I think the political part of this is also really important, because many Latin American countries have, you know, different political parties, you know, throughout, you know, the state, municipal, and federal, for example, and taking that into account, and especially since many of these elections are off cycle, so trying to find some harmonizing way of addressing that, and making sure, I think that, you know, does it, you know, promote, you know, or encourage joint decisions between the public and private sector? I think that's really key. And then I would also say, does it have measurable, you know, measurable things? Can you say, like, you know, after this point we can measure, you know, whatever we are proposing under the PPP contract? So, and one of the things I think is key is, you know, does the program or the PPP, you know, program enable companies to improve and develop their corporate social responsibility? I think always the G is always left out. And I think in our countries in Latin America, I can say that because my parents are Peruvian, so I am very much Peruvian. You know, that's something that a lot of our countries have been unfortunately impacted by. And I think that we need to have synergies between, you know, current corporate social responsibility initiatives and and make sure that that is a focus in our PPPs.
That's a great point. That's a great point. And you're right. The G is often forgotten, but we've seen projects in Latin America that have been, just destroyed because the developers, what the developers and the governments didn't take into account. They didn't strengthen this side of the equation. And another side of the equation is risk. And Camilo, I want to turn now to you, because PPPs, one of the advantages of PPPs, and I mentioned some at the beginning, but one of the advantages also is that they help us assign the risk to those players that are in the best position to face these risks. To face each risk. So you have a lot of experience advising on value investment opportunities for companies that are willing to participate in sustainable infrastructure. And you have seen firsthand what the concerns of developers are with respect to the risk associated with delivering these types of projects. So in your view, what can be done from the government or private side to catalyze the use of PPPs as a means to push sustainable infrastructure?
So I think, Ricardo, I fully agree with you, of course. Risks have to be assigned to whichever party is in best position to handle them. And we got to separate this. And this takes us back to the beginning of this conversation on defining what is it we're talking about when we talk about sustainability. Because we all know, you need an environmental license to do every infrastructure project. So who's going to get the environmental license? The public, the private? How far is the public going to cover potential additional costs or delays or whatever? That's something related to risk. I really think that when we talk about sustainability, I want to think about something else. Because otherwise we'll be talking about something, that has been in our projects for many, many years in every country. So it's more than getting an environmental license, as it was mentioned here. We were going through the process and we have to discuss with communities and stuff and finally get those permits. But I think we all want to think about a little bit more than that. So what is it that we can ask the private to do in order to have greater impact? So we, as I always advise, in the contracts, in the concession contracts, we got to be very specific in terms of what we want and what is it that the concessionaire can actually do. And of course, as I said it before, recognize that within his CapEx, within his OpEx, we want to make it throughout the project, as Jessica was saying. We just need to be conscious and include that as an additional cost, both as CapEx, as an OpEx, in the structuring of the project, and recognize that as part of the investment. That is the only way, and be very specific in terms of what is it that we want him to do. But what we want him to do, I would think, is not project by project. It has to come from the government. The government has to have a plan, an integrated plan that is very aligned with all its project portfolio. So if we're going to do a road, if we're going to do an airport, everything has to be tied together. For example, in Colombia, we're now talking about infrastructure that actually join an effort to make, for example, exporting easier. So we have a road that has to be connected to the river or to the rail, and of course, at the end, a road that actually has access to a port. But as the government decides that, the integrated infrastructure, multi-purpose infrastructure, has to define as well what is it that we want from an environmental, governance, and in general sustainability aspect of a project, of the whole projects, of all the portfolio that they have. What is it that they want? Do we want to, plant trees? Is that going to be part of the responsibility? Do we want to generate jobs in addition to the jobs generated by the construction? What else can we ask for? What else do we want to ask for? And again, very important. If we're going to ask for more, we got to recognize that as part of the CapEx or the OpEx, and recognize the investment that the investor or the developer is actually taking care of replacing the government in certain way. The government is saying, look, I need to do this. I'm going to give you this project, but in addition to building whatever, I want you to do this. Well, okay, if that's feasible and if he can do it, and if he's going to be recognized for that, I don't see a problem with that. So I think, as the governments, my recommendation would be for the governments to sit back and think, what is it that we want from ESG? How do we envision the projects, 3 years, 5 years from now? What is it that is critical for us to include in those projects? And in the structuring phase, that has to be included so that everybody is fully aware, everybody can be aware of the cost that generates. And of course, we're going to have then measurements to make sure that those things happen. I think that's the way to go.
Thanks, Camilo. We're almost running out of time, and I wanna leave the floor to Hector just to see if we can have a couple of questions. There's a couple of questions from the public. Maybe go a little bit over time. So I'm writing to the speakers via the chat, the internal chat, to see if they're available. But meanwhile, Hector, and this is so important, as a developer, what do you think is the role that PPP units have to play to increase participation of companies such as Sacyr in PPP projects? And what innovations do you think these institutions, not only PPP units, but also governments, can adopt to maximize the implementation of sustainability measures in projects?
Ricardo, just to be short, some very interesting questions for all of us. I think you should improve and increase and stimulate the private participation in P3 projects by a couple of adjustments. Is first, pursuing agencies tasked with granting license and permits to do so more quickly is important. Secondly, another measure that can be applied to stimulate the private participation is that PP units also can shorten the actual time that it takes to structure the project itself and respect the deadlines imposed for such structuring. For example, in Colombia, we have a law which establishes how long the structuring of a specific project should take. But in practice, however, PP units miss deadlines regularly, and this results in third parties' participation, losing interest in participating in the development of the relevant infrastructure project. And PP units also can try to resolve bottlenecks that result from a legal perspective or the development of the project itself. For example, in Colombia, the law shortened the time period to obtain real estate and establish a framework specific to obtaining an environmental license. Again, this gives project developers more certainty regarding the time required to develop an infrastructure project, and most important, mitigate unnecessary or incur in idle costs. Last question that you did is really important. The implementation of the sustainable measure has a cost, a very important cost. One way to stimulate that a developer could apply and implement sustainable measures is when you are evaluating the bids in the offer. For example, the developer who commits to build with green cement, or with the developer which offers building a wildlife crossing, should receive credit over a developer who does not. At the end, in my personal opinion, I insist this measure could stimulate the participation of the private sector in P3 projects and also increase the application of sustainability measures in these projects. Ricardo.
Thank you very much, Hector. And I wanna ask the participants, the panelists, if you have some minutes to answer a couple of questions, and if so, please tell me now or forever hold your peace. Yes, this will be 10 minutes, maybe a couple of questions. And so I'm trying to go through the questions, and I'm seeing that one of the ones that has the most thumbs up is one from the, let me just find it, I had it here and it moved. It's one from Lucila Spotorno from the Ministry of Transport and Mozambique. And I think this might go to you, Jessica, or maybe to Camilo, or anyone that wants to answer. And we just posted that question here in the video, on top of the video. So I'm going to read it for you. So what are the appraisals you use to prioritize sustainable PPP projects that include, for instance, equity aspects? CBA is very rigid and does not necessarily include sustainable aspects such as accessibility, inclusion, etc. So in your experience, Jessica or Camilo or whoever wants to answer this, how can we integrate these aspects into contracts? And I guess Jessica will be the first go-to person in this question.
I mean, I think the point is it's not necessary. I mean, going into the contracts and having a target is one way of addressing it. But I think it's really kind of the combination of making sure that the actors, whoever's, the developer and whoever is, whatever the financial solution is, capital markets or loans or whatever, that those entities also have similar gender targets or inclusion or equity, just because I think it's hard to say, depending on the country and what it is, looking at it holistically, you need to have by this year 5% by this year, because what would be the what would happen if they would reach that? I just think that it's a hammer, and I think we should incentivize more than obligate, even though that's what we're trying to get to. I think one of the things as sustainable development goals that I've seen happen is once you, for example, a water goal under the SDG, you promote jobs, and within that you could say within the jobs it has to be taking into account our population. It has to be X percentage needs to be with women or some other class. So I think it's actually really hard to sort of build it in specifically into the PPP contract. I think it needs to be a combination of the players, what their values are as institutions, and also maybe having a roadmap to being able to, to get there. But, they should talk to IDB Invest. They should talk to the other, institutions, because they have clear units that are addressing these specific issues. So I don't know, Johanna, you might actually have something to say about that.
I just wanted to compliment Jessie, and I believe that, as you are mentioned, it's very difficult to try to have to find one solution for general in terms of infrastructure. I mean, this is super tailor-made. Every project is different, and also this is an evolving project. That's why, as Jessica has mentioned, it is very important to be accompanied by, for example, a multilateral or a firm that can help you, because at the end, in the road, every project has different issues to face in terms of environmental and social things. So I believe that is very difficult to try to include everything in the contracts, as Jessica is mentioning, because at the end this evolves, and each project, it's very different. Even if it's the same type of project, it's going to be always different.
Thanks to Jessica and Johanna. If there are no more remarks, there's another question that I find very interesting. I don't know how many likes it has, because I can see in the Q&A session. But there's a question from Camilo Faisal, the managing director of Quantum, and what they're asking is, and I think this can go to you, Johanna. Maybe that's because I know you're involved in tourism projects, so you have been in tourism projects, and their question is, how can innovation in PPPs contribute to expanding its role to all types of sustainable economic development like PPPs in the tourism sector?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I believe that it's very interesting and probably complement what we were talking about before, and that this PPP needs to evolve and to include other sector other than the typical one. So I believe that the first thing, it's necessary to evaluate and to see which one is gonna be the more efficient way in order to structure those PPPs. The thing, for example, in tourism, is that of course it's very difficult to have, for example, revenues that are sure and that are very predictable in the future, and probably that's one of the main challenges. But saying that, I believe that precisely a good way to start looking for this is to start looking for the different risks and who is going to be able to assume those types of risks. So probably it's the most important thing to do in sectors as tourism, a social infrastructure. It's trying to find if it's possible to mitigate the risk and to be assigned between the public and the private, and being able to structure it in a very good way.
Okay, I think Camilo wants to say something. We have very little time, Camilo, but go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, specifically on tourism, I've been involved in some projects, and we started with a pre-feasibility to see if it was possible to do PPPs on tourism, and clearly it is. Again, it's just creating the right business model, the right incentives, the right risk distribution, and focusing on what market do you want to attend. We looked at a potential market that was very profitable. The investments requirements were actually low. It was more a PPP on the operation side of it, operation and maintenance, which was critical, and a huge marketing effort. So yeah, tourism and other types of infrastructure can clearly benefit from PPPs. Being flexible on the PPP model that we'll have in our heads, I think that it can be applicable. At the end, it's just, what can the PPPs, the joint effort from the government that wants to develop something, a sector, an asset, and then getting support from the private side, mostly on the financing and on the construction and operation. So it basically can apply to everything. You just have to look project by project and sector by sector to make sure that the distribution of risk, that the business model that you're developing actually addresses the sector that you're working with. That would be my recommendation.
Thank you very much, Camilo. And I think we have to wrap up the panel, right? I think it's very enlightening to hear your position and your point of view from different angles about why is it important to bring in the private sector. But I think we can all agree in several aspects. And I'm going to make a couple of bullets here. First is, and it was said here a couple of times, we need to come up with a definition. What does sustainable infrastructure mean? And how can we, and once we do that, we can develop new tools or new ways in which PPP contracts or PPP projects can enhance sustainability throughout all the sectors, taking into account, of course, that each project is different. That's the art of infrastructure. That each project is different. Each project has its own characteristics. So each time we tackle a project, it's different. I think also that we have to take into account that there's no one size fits all solution, and it was really enlightening to hear your examples and your experience. I hope it was enlightening for the rest of our audience, which was very big today. We had around 125 participants at a point, which I think it was great. I just want to thank everyone for listening. Thanks to the panelists, thanks Johanna, thanks Camilo, and thanks Hector, and of course thanks Jessica for being with us. And I just want to say that the organizers want me to tell you that we're going to have tomorrow. We're going to have a great session on contract management and planning, which is going to be organized by the World Bank. So please don't miss that. That's going to be very interesting, such as the panels that we saw today. And we're also tomorrow the Ukraine PPP unit will come. That's going to be really interesting to hear what are they doing and what's the situation there right now. Also, we're going to have the other PPP units, such as the one from Kuwait, Morocco, Poland, and Tunisia. So please come with us, join us tomorrow, and let's continue the conversation and let's keep on talking about all of this. You can reach all of us in our LinkedIn pages, and so thanks very much for listening to us. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.